Hello, good to be here. Like you heard before, I've got my background in communications. I used to work at Finnair, and I've done communications for 10 years. And for the past 4 years, I've been purely focused on social media, first at a company called Suunto, and then at our dear national airline, Finnair. One of the things I really love about social media is how it empowers people to be themselves, and how much power there is in social media when you let people do stuff. I've noticed this not only through my work, but also through a couple of personal projects. We crowdfunded a magazine in Finland. It became a much bigger phenomenon than we actually planned, which was fantastic. And I also work as an office nomad, meaning that I work in a different office each month, and it's fun to see these ideas spreading and people getting empowered. And yeah, this is one of the reasons I love social media. But anyway, I think that the change has happened. Well, you've heard how big the change is and what has happened, how the technological changes have really revolutionized the way we communicate. And I think the biggest change for us as communications people and marketing people is that we cannot control it. And it's really difficult to let go of that control. The only thing we can do is to try and provide the best possible customer experience or the best possible employee experience, be a good company to work in, so that people talk nice things about our products and services and how nice it is to work in your company. But this is the big change, and therefore I have a picture of royal microphone covers, and we have to let go of them. And we can't control it, and we can't stop this development, so we might as well embrace it and take advantage of it. I'm a big believer in employee advocacy. I think people are our biggest asset, and we should really take advantage of it. And this is a project that Pauliina mentioned. I decided that I want Finnair to be the world's most tweeting airline. So what happened was that in February, I announced that, okay, we're going to be the world's most tweeting airline. Twitter, because it was a fairly new channel to a lot of people, so there was the element of learning something new, learning new skills. And because it's fundamentally open, and therefore it's good to encourage people to share things openly on Twitter. What happened was that I organized trainings practically each week. They were open to everyone at Finnair, all employees. I trained more than 200 employees, ranging from pilots, cabin attendants, to financial experts, you name it. Everyone was invited. It was open to everyone. And yeah, then in June, we organized a big day when we organized a lot of fun program. We invited all our partners to join in. We had some celebrities who were very Finnair positive and Finnair fans. And then they were also joining the program, and people got to meet them. And we were all tweeting using one hashtag, Finnair tweets, for one day. And for one day, we actually were the world's most tweeting airline, which is an accomplishment in a sense, because Finnair is a tiny airline compared to a lot of other competitors. So if you're absolutely, in absolute figures, the most tweeting airline, then in relative figures, you really are. So it was a big change, but really, it was just a bold statement. It was crazy even to say that we have to be the world's most tweeting airline. It was a very ambitious or even a crazy goal, but we achieved it, and it wasn't really about being the world's most tweeting airline for one day. It wasn't about that, but it was about instilling that change in the company, that you are allowed to say that you work for Finnair, and you're allowed to talk about positive things about your work, or positive, negative, whatever comes to your mind. But of course, obviously, as a company, we encourage people to say good things about their work. So now I'm going to talk about how do you create such a change in your company. And really, you have to find the right motivations. And there's a great book by Simon Sinek about motivation, Start With Why. And it all stems from the fact that you have to find the right motivations for each organization. There isn't one thing that would work everywhere or for any organization, but you have to find the reasons that resonate within your company and for your people. Why would a company need to be the world's most tweeting airline or the world's most tweeting insurance company? I think the reasons are pretty obvious to us. I'm not going to go through all of them, but from the company's perspective, you want your people to talk about your products and about you because your people are probably more interesting than your brand. We know how the people's faith in traditional advertising has dropped dramatically, and people don't want to see advertisements anymore. They want to hear stories, genuine stories from real people. So this is a real possibility for a lot of companies. Also, it gives your content much more credibility if your people are sharing it. So say you're creating a fantastic video and then you share it through your own channels. You're probably going to get much better results if you harness your own employees. And if they think it's good and they share it, then it's really going to spread. So this is really a part of your distribution strategy. Make your employees your brand ambassadors. This image is actually the commander of the Finnish Defense Forces, and he's on a Hornet taking a selfie. So this is actually, it's a big change. Can you imagine? Finnish Defense Forces is such a traditional company, or it's not even a company, an organization. And the commander, he's a top authority, he's the highest in command. And I think this photo just, like at least in my mind, it put the whole organization in a whole new category in my mind. And if you have people like this in your company, they can really make your brand look so much more interesting than it would otherwise. For a lot of companies, we're struggling with media and struggling with getting positive coverage because the news criteria is such that positive things are not news, negative things are. So really, we want to create our own counterforce to traditional media and constantly tell positive stories, little things about your everyday life, what's happening inside the company, and build personal relationships with people so that they understand that this what I'm reading in the newspaper, this is not the whole truth, because I'm also following this company employee who's telling the exact opposite, and they're having a great time at work. And you know, it's about building trust, which you can then rely on when shit hits the fan. And also, as is the case for Finnair, Tommy, he's a Finnair pilot. Traditional media a couple of times picked his Instagram photos and made news out of them. So this is also how traditional media picks news stories. So if you have people who create interesting content, you also have a chance of setting up your own news cycle. So it's not just about issuing press releases, but also about making your people do it for you. Another photo from Tommy, the same guy who you saw before. This is one of his Instagram photos. And he's constantly producing content that Finnair marketing department or communications department cannot produce because they're not out there constantly flying. But if you're a pilot, the only thing that you see is blue skies and beautiful clouds, and you can always take a photo like this when you're at work. So your employees have access to a lot of interesting places that you cannot access as a marketing person or a communications person, or when you get there, it's too slow, it's too late. So they can create much more interesting content than the communications or marketing organization can. From the employee's perspective, and I think this is actually really important to understand that now that I'm talking about how important it is to make your employees brand advocates, it has to stem from the fact that people must be motivated to do this. There has to be something in it for them. You can't expect people to talk nice things about their employer just for the sake of it. There has to be something in it for them. And my understanding is that you should really look for the reasons as close to you as possible. Make social media a part of your everyday life so that you're constantly doing something, like instill little habits in your everyday life so that social media, you become familiar with these channels and you know how they work. And that way, then you can start talking about where you work and finding your professional networks where you can start talking with people. But if you don't know how these things work, then it's really difficult to jump into these professional conversations, because then you might just look silly. For a lot of people, it might be something like social TV. Just try and see what people are talking when they're watching TV. What was surprising at Finnair was that the reason why so many people motivated in using Twitter was that it's an organization where people tend to be very prepared for all kinds of crises. And when I told them that, if there's the next tsunami or there's an earthquake or there's political demonstrations and all the roads are blocked in your destination where you are, this might be the only channel where you get the information from. And then they're like, wow, yeah, I really have to learn to tweet. But that doesn't necessarily work for all organizations, so you have to find the reasons which work for your people. But there usually is a reason, and there are conversations that people are interested in, but you just have to be creative and find the reasons that make people interested. For some people, the motivation can be just so that they can take part in conversation. For some people might be more motivated by getting social appraisal. They may get satisfaction from getting new followers, taking part in conversations, being influential. And for leaders, top executives, I think it's self-evident you really should be there, because you want to have your own media and get your own message across. So if you're not there, you're really not leading your company. So really, to all executives, they should be a no-brainer. They really should be in social media, but I don't know about Sweden, but in Finland that's not the case yet. Secondly, after you find the motivation, you really need to empower people. You have to convince them that this is something that they are allowed to do and encouraged to do. I think the most important tool for doing this is actually setting up social media guidelines. Good guidelines are something that are very encouraging and tell your employees what is expected of them and what is not approved. So say you want to see more photos from client meetings or things like that. So you tell them, this is great. This is the kind of content that we love seeing. So please produce more of that. And then you may have like confidential customer information or something else which is strictly forbidden. So you tell that. And I think for my experience is that with the companies that I've worked with, people usually like having social media guidelines. They think it's good that they understand, okay, this is what's expected of me, and this is a no. But encouraging guideline is important. And then training. I think this varies a lot. Some people are very comfortable with just logging in and starting using a service, and then some other people want to be shown which buttons to press. But training is a really simple thing you can do to remove the obstacles and talk about social media guidelines. Actually, that was the main focus of our training. It wasn't so much about how to use Twitter as a tool, but more about how do you, as a Finnair employee, talk about your work in a way that is nice and supporting your own personal objectives and also our company objectives. And then you have to trust people and show them what they can do, open doors for them, show them the conversations where they should be taking part, and then stand by their side, hold their hand when they're kind of... The first time you enter a conversation, it can be quite scary, so you have to be supportive. This is again an example from Finnair where there's this is Maarit Keränen, who's responsible for all the food at Finnair. So we put her in front of all the customers on Facebook, and she was there tweeting, chatting with customers on Facebook, answering all the customers' questions. But when you do this together with your experts, then they notice that, okay, it wasn't that bad, and they could do it on their own. And finally, you have to lead this change. This is a strategic choice that you're making, so you have to lead it. And most importantly, I think for this kind of change to occur, you have to get the support from your top management. In the Finnair case, we had the whole executive board on board. This is the Chief Communications Officer, Chief Executive Officer, and Chief Financial Officer in my Twitter training, learning to tweet. And they were shown in these conversations and leading by example, which I think is really important. And if you think about the commander of the Finnish Defence Forces, the media loved this tweet. It was all over the press. It was like people were retweeting it and commenting on it, and people just loved it. They thought it was really cool and brave and really unexpected. But what's notable about this is that the biggest resistance was inside the organization. It was everyone in his company or organization saying, oh, it was against the guidelines and there were some security issues. And of course he was aware of that. He's not stupid. He knew that he was bending the rules, but he knew the power of a tweet like this. But this is very typical that when you want this kind of change to happen, you have to bend the rules and you have to be brave and you have to lead by example. And actually this takes me to my last slide, and the most important one. I've developed this model for companies and the mindset which you should adopt. I think companies should adopt the mindset that you're actually aiming a little bit too far. Because really, people know how far they can go. If you aim a little bit too far, you're constantly generating content which is interesting, goes viral, creates topics that people like talking about. And because people still know how far they can go, they won't go that far. They will actually start producing content which gets good results. But creating good content, it doesn't mean that you go crazy and you're breaking the rules all the time and you're taking hornet selfies. It can be just expressing your opinion, being your true self, showing a little bit of personality besides your work profile or when you talk about work. It's about being consistently you in everything you are. And it's not comfortable to be you or say what you think or disagree publicly with somebody or to enter these conversations or face criticism. But when you do that, you become interesting and your content becomes interesting. And when I talk about virality, that's not necessarily a goal for everyone. You may have a company of experts and you just want to create conversations. Maybe you want to be seen as an expert in your field. Your messages don't necessarily have to get much reach, but if you reach the right people and if you're influencing the right people, then you're doing the right thing. But if you're constantly doing what's safe, then you're just here in this bottom corner here, then you're not getting any results and you're not interesting. But really, aim too far and you start getting good results. So, in short, you have to find the reasons and the right motivation, motivated from your company's perspective. This is business. This has to support your company strategy or organization strategy. And then you have to find the employer's perspective. There has to be something in it for each employee. Then you have to empower, guide people, train them, and stand by them when you're going through this change. And finally, lead. Get support from top management. Lead by your own example. Get your teammates to lead the change. Get your top executives to lead the change. And then try and go too far, because I bet you can't. you. Questions?
Yeah, I have loads of questions. and our editors probably too. So I'm happy you mentioned at the end that this is business, because usually people tend to talk about social media as something that's sort of nice to have, or we just have to have it. But actually tying it to your business objectives,
yes.
Is that something that you think also sort of, when you try to convince the top management,
yes,
is
definitely.
important in that sort of process as well?
Definitely, but I think at the same time you have to understand that you're not in social media just to sell, because that's what a lot of people think when they think about business. But for example, for a leader or a top executive, leading is communication. So you have to be there and you have to communicate your values and what the company is aiming for to really be a leader. And if you're not there, somebody else is going to take your space. So yeah, you have to think about your objectives in a pretty broad way. And it's about building relationships. When you have a relationship with somebody, then you can start selling or convincing people and so on.
So it's more of a long-term relationship building thing than this selling here and now. Sort of.
Yes, this is very long-term relationship building. That's the way I see it.
And tell us more about your social media policy. Did you have like a 50-page manual, or was it more like 10 steps or sort of?
No, actually our social media policy was based on, we had a set of, we didn't call them values, but they were sort of principles that were guiding the customer experience, the way the customer experience was defined. And there were certain things like being, what was it called? Like being yourself and can't remember the exact words, but the idea was that you're allowed to break the rules if the situation requires that. So we just applied the same principles to social media and thought about what it means when you apply that in social media. And the way we did it was that we actually created the guidelines in the Finnair intranet, and it was a page that anyone could edit and comment on. So the idea was that it's not set in stone, but it's something that's always complemented, and then it can be changed. It's not forever. But also a very important thing in doing this was training managers so that they would all talk to their own employees and go through the social media guidelines so that everyone understands them.
I'm curious, how many of you in the audience who are working with social media have a policy that you follow, or have had some kind of sort of training in what you do? Raise your hand if you have. I see 3 hands. Yeah, because as I said, I've worked with social media for many years, and it's always been sort of like, as we say in Swedish, shooting from the hip sort of thing, where you just improvise and gut feeling, but you can actually tie sort of statistics and data to it, and sort of know that what you do actually has an effect. Yeah. Interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.